So thank you for giving me an opportunity to come and just speak to your poetry class today here. And I am from the Alabama Humanities Alliance. I'm one of their Rhodes Scholars. And basically I go around the state and I do speaking engagements. And one of the speaking topics I do is poetry. Also I do things on literature and also things on healthcare and humanities. I am a poet, a creative writer, and a storyteller. So I also come out and I do a lot of storytelling. So one thing that I'm going to kind of do today is just talk with you all briefly. How much time do I have?
What you want? We're here 6:30.
Okay. Well, I'm not gonna. No, I will not be here. I will not be talking to 6:30. And I am from Birmingham, so I drove down today from Birmingham. So I'm from Birmingham, so I most definitely will maybe I'll tell you a little bit about how I work as a healing poet, because I do healing work and healing art, and then maybe give us a poetry exercise to do. And then we can do that poetry exercise, and then I'll be quiet and just spend a little time listening to you all, and I may have to step out early as well. So that's kind of what we'll be doing and why we're here today. But I wanted to start with the healthcare and humanities through the Humanities Alliance and what I do as a storyteller, a poet, and a writer. So I work at UAB Hospital as an artist in resident. So I actually go into the hospital as an artist, and I work with people and do creative writing and poetry bedside, and also with folks who are in the hospital. And so I kind of just knock on the door and I ask people, do they want a poem today? Do they want to write today? Do they want to journal today? Would they like a story today? And most people are like, no, lady, crazy lady, get out of my way. Who wants a poem, right? Who wants a poem? What is it, even is a poem, right? So it's one of those uncomfortable things. But then once I start giving them poems and I start doing poems and I start reminding them about poems, then it really enhances the healing environment. And then when I leave them with a journal and tell them that journaling can really support you in healing, I come back and they have a journal full of all kinds of things, and then they want to show me their poems. So that's kind of what I thought we would do today, is then if you have any questions for me at the end, I'll kind of keep that open. But I'll kind of just start with some of the writing and some of the things I go around and speak about. So we had a little pandemic. I think we're in the epidemic of the pandemic that people don't really want to talk about right now. The influx of what happens after a pandemic or after the crisis has been kind of, erupted. And during the pandemic, we weren't allowed to go into patients' rooms in the hospital setting. And one of the things that I wasn't able to do was my artist in residency. So I had to figure out a creative way to bring poetry, of course, virtually, or poetry into the setting. But also I had to figure out a way to help healthcare providers. And so I became a certified listener poet. So a certified listener poet is a poet who goes into the healthcare environment, listens to the stories of people, and then writes a custom poem for them and reads it to them to support burnout and to help them heal. And so I did that with our chaplain, who had been at University of Alabama at Birmingham, one of the largest hospitals, right, in Alabama, for over 30 years. And as the chaplain, he was not allowed to go into the patient's rooms as a chaplain during the pandemic. So just imagine, I know we think about a lot of things, but we probably didn't even think about that, right? About at the height where most people are in need of a chaplain, at the height of when, more people are coming into the hospital, at the height when more people, unfortunately, are passing away, at the height when families do not have access to their religious person in their life, then we had chaplains who could not go into the room. So I asked Malcolm, who was the chaplain, what did you do? How did you respond? And he said, well, we did a lot of phone calls, but it still wasn't the one-on-one interpersonal communication that chaplains need to have. And so he said to me, the thing that he did was one day he just put his hand on the window pane in front of the room of the people who were on the other side in the hospital setting. And as he put that there, he saw nurses, and he saw doctors, and he saw other staff putting their hands on those window panes. And the people on the other side of those windows who were there sick or with their family members or just by themselves. The ones that could rise from their beds came back and did the same thing, and the ones that couldn't from their beds did the same thing. And so I asked Malcolm if he could have a poem about that time, what would that poem be about? And so I'm going to read you that poem. We'll get it, an excerpt from that poem, and from the whole idea of the good listening practice that we did. You get more paperwork. This was a little. So not only did Malcolm tell me about putting his hand on the window pane during the pandemic, but he also told me who taught him about compassion and where that hand came from. So here's Malcolm, who has retired and has been there for over 30 years and is the head of chaplaincy and moved over to be part of in the C-suites, with those folks. And I asked him, I said, what did you learn from that? And he said, it was my father who taught me compassion. It's because he said he remembered when his father, who was a deacon, in his aging years could not go back into the church. He would see his father on the black rotary phone in the house. The one that sat on the little table or the one that was in between the wall. He saw his father, the deacon, on that black rotary phone, talking to his parishioners every single day. And he remembered his father's hand on that phone. In some kind of way, unconsciously, or maybe intentionally, or we know how the spirit works, right? There is something greater inside of us that is outside of us. Also put Malcolm's hand on that window like his daddy's hand was on that rotary black phone. And he said he remembered his daddy telling his parishioners at the end of his daddy's life to live it. That if you were going to tell somebody about life, if you're going to tell somebody about God, if you're going to tell somebody about church, if you're going to tell somebody about what it is that they needed to do, you need to make sure that you were living it. And so Malcolm, the son, said for 30 years that's what he has been doing as the chaplain, living it. And so when he put his hands during the pandemic on those window panes, he was living it. And when the physicians and the nurses came, and the CNAs and the dietary aides and the janitors came and did their hands right after him, all dressed in all the garb they had to be dressed in during the pandemic, they were living it too. And somehow that black rotary phone transported into 2020 at a time where we needed that deacon the most. And so part of his poem was live it. To live it, to pivot, to shift and embrace newness with fresh faith. Your father, a good father, a great father, who taught a son to live it. Modeling the roots of non-judgment. When fear threatens the peace of humanity, live it. To live it. Live it. So that is just a snippet or just an excerpt. So I want to ask each one of you, as you think about writing a poem or a beginning of a poem, how do you plan to live it? Or how have you lived it? Have you lived it like my grandmother who sat on that side pew in the church in Fawnsdale, Alabama, and I used to sit on her little lap. I had my thick thighs on her thick thighs, and I sat on her lap every Sunday morning. And I would see her just crying, and I didn't know why she was crying every Sunday morning, and I would just take my hand and wipe it across the olive Olay stains on her face, and then I would put it on mine, and I could smell the olive Olay today whenever I just think about her. She taught me how to live it, so that today I can still remember the smell of a grandmother who held me. My grandmother was poetry. Malcolm's dad, the deacon, was poetry. Malcolm is poetry. We are poetry today. So I have these little journals. It's what I gave Malcolm when I asked him to write his little paper, his little poem, and I want you all to think. Let's take 7 minutes and do something what I call a fast write. A fast write is where whatever comes up, we allow to come out. A fast write. Whatever comes up, we allow to come out. If it comes out like poetry, we have a poem. If it comes out like a children's lullaby, then we have a lullaby or a nursery rhyme. If it comes out like the New York Times best-selling first line, then we have us $1 million and we don't ever have to come again. So 7 minutes. I want you to write from the theme, live it. 7 minutes. I'm going to put a timer on. Then we'll come back and we'll share our live it poems. Okay? We'll share our live it poems, and then we'll see how we feel, and then you won't hear from me anymore today. Okay, so time is up. That was quick and fast. It's a fast write. And how did that feel for everyone? Was that cool? What emotions came up for anybody? Was it stressful?
No, it didn't about that.
Okay, 7 minutes is a perfect write. It's totally imperfect. It's also a time for processing. If you did not feel like writing, or if you have already brought some things in, maybe a good time to kind of revisit those things. I want to hear from you what came up for you all. Remember Malcolm, he said live it, pivot, shift, and embrace newness with fresh faith. He had a father, a good father, a great father who taught him as a son to live it. He modeled the roots of non-judgment. When fear threatens the peace of humanity, live it, live it. So I welcome you all to share. Who would like to share something they have written or your experience of writing?
Well, I'll start first. This came so free to me. I'll stand up here.
Okay.
Yeah, surprised it flowed. It was a blessing the way it flowed, the way it did. So, was to live it. To live a life of liberty for a price of privilege to give. With the genuine spirit of a caring generosity, because I am blessed with this life to live. From the innocence from birth to the presence of a blessed, proactive living earth. I am blessed by the best. I have indeed passed this life's ongoing test. That's what I got.
Good job.
It's a good job. Thank you. Snap, 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 snap. Not only for your beautiful poetry, but also for being our first one to go. It's so important when our voices are lit in the room, right? When we hear those voices in the room and that poetry flows, then we know that we are in the spirit of flow. So thank you, sir. Appreciate you. Yes. Who else wants to go? Slam, poetry, spoken word?
Well,
No.
I'll go.
Okay.
This was short. I wish I had more time, but here we go. I will tell you a little bit about how I lived it. Growing up, times it got hard. Seeing small things turn into large. I asked my father why things are so hard. I asked my father why times are hard, are so bad. Why are we seeing or sad all the time? These things will not last. These things will always be in the past.
I wrote a poem honoring someone sitting at this table today. And you will notice in the reading exactly who it is. Tribute to God be the glory for the Imogene Mixon story. She was born to parents who cared to guide the skills their culture shared. Imogene used her childhood learnings to propel her to wider goals and yearnings. She earned degrees and excelled in teaching and used administrative skills far-reaching. Imogene is a leader with variety of skill. She speaks with precision and she acts with will. She plans and communicates in a positive way, and she applies ethics and humor in life each day. Imogene is a skilled writer to know, as reports and projects and devotionals show. Her peers and relatives are consistently inspired by this Dale County leader who never gets tired.
Oh my goodness.
True. Yes, thank you for doing
To
that.
live it,
Yes, ma'am.
Let us see it. The student in the third row, the student who has that questioning look, the student who somehow is never included in the group, the student who is habitually late, and that student who never participates, the person who teaches across the hall, the one who never answers my call, the stranger who never smiles back at me, those many people whose lives I still see and care about and love unconditionally. To live it, let us see it. The student, the teacher, the stranger, those many people, see it. See all of us as brothers and sisters.
Every day I feel your eyes upon me as I move about my daily activities. But before I commit, I pause and I ask myself, are you ready to step forward with the lighted torch to blaze a path for others who are struggling in darkness? Hold high the torch so all can see. See God's goodness. Light the path and light it good. Hold high the torch, my son. Hold it high.
Thank you all for sharing. And there's an African word called Sawubona. Sawubona. Sawubona, which means I see you, I hear you, I feel you. So this time I had with you all, Sawubona. 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 Thank you all so much.
Could I make a comment?
Yes.
Okay.
Any questions or comments? Yes.
Yeah, what I wrote was, it didn't have the word live it in it or anything like that, but it was from a poem, not the actual words of that poem, but it was something that my mom had adopted. It was a poem written called Hold High the Torch that she helped one of my older sisters back in the early 60s that she had to recite at her graduation. And Hold High the Torch became her mantra for her family, her children, her grandchildren, and great-grandkids. So those words remain embedded in my mind and in my heart and in my soul. And anyone in that family, in my family, when we say hold high the torch, we know exactly what that means. So go out and do your best, be an example for mankind and blaze new paths and light the way for others.
Beautiful.
In
Hold
other
high
words,
the
live
torch.
it.
Live it.
Hold high
Exactly.
the torch.
Live it.
Thank you for the beautiful tributes. Thank you for the holding high the torch. Thank you for seeing it in order to live it. Thank you so much for the Holy Spirit, the Son, and Father God, and all that was in this space to get today. And I really appreciate all of y'all for listening. So thank you all for having me and listening to me as well. Thank you. Absolutely, yes.